Welcome to another episode of Relatively Damaged Live. My name is Angela, and this is
Kat.
The live shows are currently streamed Mondays to Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. Remember to follow and subscribe and share with your friends if you're enjoying our topics. We like to discuss things we find interesting for about 30 minutes. So today's deep topic is... what are the places that scare you? Take it away, Kat.
So, as if you're a regular watcher, you know we usually have a quote. So our quote for today is, how are we going to spend this brief lifetime? Are we going to strengthen our well-perfected ability to struggle against uncertainty? Or are we going to train in letting go? Are we going to hold on stubbornly? Hold on one second. Sorry. Are we going to hold on stubbornly to I'm like this and you're like that? Or are we going to move beyond that narrow mind? Could we start to train as a warrior, aspiring to reconnect with the natural flexibility of our being and to help others do the same? If we start to move in this direction, limitless possibilities will begin to open up. And who said that?
Pima Chodron.
That's right.
From her book, The Places That Scare You, actually. Aptly titled. I'm pretty sure it's from that one. It may have been from another book, The Way of, that speaks about the way of the Bodhisattva. So,
but it was Pima Chodron.
It most definitely was her. And I'm pretty certain it was The Places That Scare You. And I think that it's interesting that, the places that scare, I think, people the most. And I think sometimes even me, or many times, like, I'm more scared about the emotion of that moment or the fear that comes up in those moments, or not knowing what to do, that I tend to recoil. And just even to give an example, I received a text from someone last week, and it was, they were frustrated about something, and I wanted to fix it because it was so uncomfortable just to sit in it. And I know this about myself, and I'm just becoming more and more aware sooner, I think, is what it is, that's what is happening. And I almost responded, well, are you breathing? And I'm like, wait, no. I don't, my job is not to fix, everyone is capable, right? Like, everyone. And so I just responded with, gosh, sounds like you're frustrated. And they're like, well, yeah, that's what I wrote. But sitting with that uncomfortableness was difficult.
Yeah. And, I get that. So for me, like, an uncomfortable situation is when somebody has gone through a tragedy and you don't know what to say, because what people say if somebody passes away seems so trite. And, I mean, what I really want to say, I think, and it's just, I don't know if I feel that it's culturally inappropriate or whatever, is to say, I know you're hurting.
Yeah.
I'm here. And just sit with that. Just the acknowledgement of that. And maybe that's a step into the places that scare you. And obviously, we're not talking about real places.
But also in those real places, those emotions could come up, right? Like on the edge of a cliff.
Yes. I I have a weird thing about mausoleums.
Interesting. They scare you, huh?
Yeah, well, yeah. When I was a kid, my grandparents are in a mausoleum, and we were visiting, and we got locked in. And so I was convinced, because they also had children, like in the staircases and little vaults, and I was convinced, because the mind of a child, um, that the ghosts of the children were going to come out and get me because they were jealous that I was alive and they weren't. I created this fantasy in my head. Now, that's a child's fantasy, and it was kind of weird because it lasted a long time into adulthood, in the sense that I would have dreams about it, the same dream that I had when I was a child. But isn't it like, okay, so that's a child's fantasy or nightmare. But in a sense, don't we do that as adults, but with a more adult theme?
I think so. I know I do.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's these stories I tell myself. And I tell stories about the people in my life. I mean, if you think about it, we as humans are fantastic storytellers just right here. I mean, who needs to read a book? What's happening is here is beautiful. But there's the problem is that there's no separation when it's in here for me to go, oh, like I've been reading a book by Nirmala, and actually this quote I think is, or this paragraph is true. This truth is more obvious when it comes to an external event that doesn't take place near us. A bird flying high above us or the distant sound of traffic obviously within our field of awareness, but it doesn't feel like these events happen to us. But if that word bird were to fly in front of our face or that traffic were to slow us down on the highway, it would feel like it was happening to us. Things that
Mm.
arise within our own body and mind feel even more like they are happening to us. When a strong experience of fear, desire, or confusion arises, it seems like it's happening to us instead of within us. And isn't that the truth? Like, if it's close, it's happening, like that perception is it's happening to me, not for me,
Mm-hmm.
not anything except to me.
Oh yeah, and it's even when somebody else is like having a bad day and they snap at you. What did I do wrong? What is the problem? Why are they snapping at me? All these things. It's just like, what's going on? And you get this like, and it really is more of what's going on with the other person. It may have absolutely nothing to do with you or anything that you did. Um, it's just what's going on. But because we were the target of their frustration, um, we think it's about us, and it's really not.
Well, and in that situation, how does one even respond in love and understanding if they're believing that it's them who caused it? Like if I'm believing that someone snapped at me, and because they snapped at me, it's me and not them, and then the story that comes along with that, like it could just go downhill super super fast.
Exactly. And this is what was the interesting. We had actually chosen this quote a while ago, and that's why I want to go back to it for a second,
Yeah.
because at first I had a problem with it because I didn't understand it, but I've really, since I've kind of thought about this for a while, it says, could we start to train as a warrior, aspiring to reconnect with the natural flexibility of our being, and then helping others do the same? And so I was thinking of what that is, because you think of a warrior as someone who gets up and fights. And I think that that's not really true. I think it's what it is more of, and I'm thinking of the flexibility. If you're familiar with some of the martial arts, Aikido, I think it's Aikido, that you use the other person's, if you're fighting them, using the other person's moves against them. So if somebody comes at you with a punch, you go back and try and use their power against them. And this is not necessarily a fight, but it's that kind of thing. What is it that you have to take on for yourself? And what is it that you can get out of the way? And knowing when to do that. So it's like when to engage and when not to engage. And so that's what I was thinking about, being prepared to it in terms of being that, having that mental, emotional, I don't want to say maturity, but flexibility to be able to understand what's going on. And this is mine to take, and this is not mine to take.
Like take what you like and leave the rest.
Yeah.
And it's not even what you liked, but take what is your portion of it and leave the rest to the other person to figure out. Which is easier said, I think, than done for most of us humans.
Well, okay. So, my thing is if, you come at me with an accusation about something, my usual reaction is to either go away. Like, I'm not going to deal with it. I'll appease you. I'll just do whatever. Just because to get out of that uncomfortable situation, to get out of that place that scares me, which is conflict. Or I can choose to, my other natural modus operandi is to fight back. So if you say I did something, I'm going to come back even stronger. No. And the real warrior, again, that whole idea of taking on what is mine is coming to that conversation, that uncomfortable conversation, and bringing the other person, having others acknowledge that, when you came at me and accused me of doing that, you hurt my feelings. This is what I thought. And that's very uncomfortable to say that. It has a certain vulnerability that you have to have. But that opens that door and allows you to bring the other person in that conversation where it's uncomfortable, but it's at a place where you can get a resolution.
Right. And I think that takes compassion and understanding also in order to get there. Because if I don't come to that conversation with compassion and understanding, or even a willingness to understand, like I have to be willing to be afraid and willing to understand and willing, there's so many places there that I could make a choice to not participate or to become, instead of like the way of the Bodhisattva, where the world is full of suffering and the job is to share that love and compassion and to help bring that to this world. It's two different perspectives. And I think a lot of times I'm not even consciously aware of where I'm coming from. And I think most people aren't, right? And that just goes back to they know not what they do. So if I can start there for me, if I can start there, then I can come to the conversation from my own perspective.
Right. And yeah, that's a really good, they know not what they do. And most of the times I don't know what I'm doing. So I have to really look at myself. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling that? Why do I have this reaction when these things happen? And it's scary and it's uncomfortable and it's hurtful. So it's how do you move past that?
Past that pain and suffering to the next, to love. That's, I think, a beautiful question. And I think first, for me, I have to give room to those icky feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and in some ways, love them for showing me whatever it is they're going to show me, instead of shrinking back from the hot stove of anger or frustration or whatever. If I can love it and be like, okay, I know you're showing me something,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of be at peace with that feeling, it helps me shift into, I think, what it's trying to tell me. But when I can't be, when I can't do that, then I'm just reactive and I don't know what I'm doing. It's really clearly coming from a very subconscious or unconscious place, I think, when a person simply reacts. And it is so hard not to.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's the conscious brain versus the lizard brain. The lizard brain is reactive.
Mm-hmm.
The conscious brain, it takes a little bit longer to get there. But that's where we have that thinking, that processing. It's not all that instinctiveness. And so, I remember learning about addictions, and they said when you have a craving for something. So let's say if I were a smoker, and I wanted to stop smoking, and I have a craving for a cigarette, it takes about 90 seconds for your conscious brain to get to that point where you can rationalize that craving, and acknowledge, I'm having a craving for a cigarette. Okay, I need to sit with that and then be able to let it go. And it's one of the ways, or the tools, that people with addictions like that can use to learn to break that addiction. So I think it's the same way with those emotions and those feelings. It's a instinctual reaction. A craving
Mm-hmm.
is an instinctual reaction because we've accustomed our bodies to a certain
Well,
substance.
yeah, and I think there's this belief too, just in how we grow up. What I mean, think about commercials. We have this very we there's this idea that we have that control, and I don't necessarily think that that is true. That
Mm.
yes, but yes, and it takes a minute to figure out what is even happening. And I I don't think it's super easy.
It's not. It takes a discipline. And if you're thinking of warriors, it's a discipline. You look at like the Shaolin monks, and you're seeing them and how they practice over and over again. It's a discipline. People who meditate, we meditate regularly. When we first started, at least for me, it was really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's so much easier because of the discipline of the practice and doing it. And it doesn't mean every day is always easy. Some days are more difficult than others, but that's part of the practice.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're dealing with these places that scare us, for me, I find if I acknowledge I what I'm feeling in that situation, be it fear, be it anger, be it jealousy, whatever, that I acknowledge that feeling, and naming what it is goes a long way to knowing how to fight it, if I'm going to use the warrior terminology,
Mm-hmm.
on
Mm-hmm.
how to approach it.
Well, or how to, like, I don't know, for me, I've really been pondering this whole loving things, like how to go about it lovingly, right? Like it, because as soon as I start fighting, I think of it as like well, for instance, a good example probably is my pain, is it tensing up while it seems to be what happens actually hurts me more
Mm-hmm.
than leaning into it and relaxing with it. So I think that being willing to let the pain exist, let the emotion exist, let all of that happen. And, so for me, fight is not a good word.
Well,
Only because in my head, you know what I go to? I go to rawr.
right. And here's the thing, and that's why I think I had a problem with that quote when we first took a look at it, was because I don't look at it. The tools of that warrior, maybe, this is going to sound so like hippy dippy, but a love warrior in a sense. What are my tools? My tools to fight that are that love, that compassion, that understanding. It's not a physical fight. It's how do I approach that? So those are that's my spear, that's my rifle, is love and compassion.
Yeah. Well, and you're just reminding me of, like, I think it's Byron Katie, and I'm sure some other people that say if so no one injures someone else unless they're really confused. Anyway, especially Byron Katie, I think, comes from that perspective. So, you know, if someone says something and it triggers something inside of me, and I just react, and that other person is now hurt, instead of really consciously coming from a perspective of love, then of course I was confused. Like, I don't know, like, because I think we are love. It just, what all had to go right for us to be here? What all has to go right for the plant to blossom? One plant to blossom and another one not to, and what is it that why is it that worked? And I know those are deep philosophical questions, but have you met me?
And I love those questions, indulging them.
Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, when we start thinking about those things, of course, those are the questions. But again, I just go back to, how am I going to react? What am I going to give into? One time I went we're talking about, so here's a literal place. I went ziplining with a friend. And one of the things that we had that was an option if we wanted to do it, was to actually jump off a tower, and then we were on a tether, and then it would stop us before we hit the ground. And there were about 8 of us. And my friend, who's done all kinds of stuff like that, adventure stuff all her life, she was just like, oh yeah, I'll do it. She did it. And only 2 other people in the group did it. I was not one of them, because I was there and I'm like, I'm going to do it. But, that was the lizard brain, don't jump off. And then the logical brain get in, well, I'm a lot bigger than my friend. She's this petite little thing, and I'm a pretty big person, and, twice as big as her. And I'm just like, nah, it's not going to hold me, justifying the fear. And, fear exists for a reason. Fear is a protective emotion. It protects us from that. But we can make a choice to look beyond that fear. And we don't always do it. I didn't do it in that instance. There were instances when I was fearful and I didn't make good choices.
Mm-hmm. Like, coming from the perspective of, oh darn it, I lost the word. You're so afraid that it's scarcity mindset almost. There's another word, but it's not coming to mind right now. That there's just no safety, and because there's no safety, just the next choice has to be the right choice, type thing.
Yes.
Is that what you mean? Okay.
Similar to that. Or it's things like, well, what will people think of me? The scarcity mindset. Well, if I don't do this, I'm going to be alone forever and nobody will ever be there for me. Things like that. So all these other things that are reasons not to act on something or to react in a certain way, instead of saying, what is the loving thing to do in this situation? And
Well,
it
and I
may be
think,
hard,
right.
but because
And
of
I
the
think,
fear, you can't even react.
right. So how do we give room to the fear to exist? Like sometimes I think there's this belief, oh, fear should not exist, anger should not, these are all bad emotions, and therefore, but the reality of it is I think they're helpful, and they do have information for us. So how do we get to that point where we're willing to let those emotions exist and to love them, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Well, I had a conversation last week with a friend, and um, we were talking about being angry about something, and I just said, it's okay to be angry. It's not okay to live there.
Mm. Hmm. So
So
kind of like the lake parable, the salt in the lake parable. So sure, taking a bitter cup of salt water is one thing if you take that salt and put it in a cup, whereas going to the lake, putting it in that lake, giving it that room, the water can still taste good from
right,
the lake, whereas from the cup it's horrible.
right. So if you're going to put salt, if you're going to have that salt being the anger, and you put it in that glass, and that glass is you're going to drink from that glass, and you keep going back, oh, I'm going to put more salt in the glass and drink another water. Well, that's just, you're causing yourself that distaste
Yeah.
or discomfort or anger, if the salt is that. But if you put it out there in that lake, then you find that space, spread it out. But acknowledging it in the moment is okay. I feel this. I feel fear. I feel anger. I feel frustration. Because
Yeah.
that's part of the human experience.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things you're reminding me of right now, I was watching 1883. I think it's on Paramount, and I think one of the things the daughter says about problems, and she's saying her dad says it is the great thing about problems is they'll still be problems later. You don't have to do anything about them right now. And I thought that is actually so wise. Unless it's imminent, I give it a little bit of room. Let's see what happens.
Well, yeah. Um, and that just reminds me, because so talking about that, yeah, it's still going to be a problem. I'm thinking of the thing, if let's say you're when your kids were little, if you would have seen them out in the middle of the street, you would have gotten that fear. Oh my God, my kids are out in the street. And that fear would have caused you to take action, i.e., to get them out of the street, to keep them safe.
Right.
So fear has its place.
Yeah.
It's what we do with it.
Yeah. It's a good point, because all problems cannot wait.
Yes, most can, but and most, again, because if we're in that moment of fear, i.e., the child is in the middle of the road, you've got to get them out right away.
Yeah.
Other problems can wait. The windshield on the car has a crack, which we do have, but it's not imminent. It's something, yeah, I'm going to need to take care of. Because I could get a ticket, it could get worse and obstruct my vision, all that kind of stuff. But it's something that has to be taken care of. It's a problem, but it's not something that needs to be taken care of right away.
Yeah. What a great conversation today.
Kind of reminds me of the Serenity Prayer.
Yeah.
Well, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. The windshield is cracked. The child is in the middle of the street. I can't change what is at that moment. The courage to change the things I can. I can get that child out of the street. I can arrange for an appropriate time to get the windshield fixed. And the wisdom to know the difference. So what do I have to do now and what do I have to do later?
Beautiful.
I don't know.
I love it. As always, such a great conversation. Well, there's also Relatively Damaged podcast where I interview amazing guests who have overcome some sort of struggle and how they found hope and healing in their lives. You can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple, and many more. I'm Angela, and this is
Kat.
And we'll